Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're opening up a really remarkable historical file. It focuses on that collision between a new technology and, well, entrenched authority.
Hmm.
The sources you've shared with us really zero in on one of the most consequential moments in human history. We're talking about the arrival of the movable type printing press. And our mission today is to understand why this, relatively simple machine caused such a seismic shift in power. We want to go beyond the idea that it just made books cheaper. We're trying to dissect a fundamental challenge to hierarchy itself. And the core thesis we're really tasked with unpacking is this: the press didn't just spread knowledge, it questioned who had the right to control it.
And what's so fascinating here, I think, is just trying to grasp the sheer weight of the world that printing completely disrupted. I mean, before Gutenberg, knowledge didn't really flow. It trickled, and it trickled laboriously through these incredibly thick filters. Imagine the entire global infrastructure for information being, say, a handful of scriptoria, these monastic writing rooms. A trained scribe would spend maybe 10 months, sometimes even longer, just copying a single long manuscript. A Bible, maybe, or a major philosophical text,
A single copy.
a single copy. And that manuscript, it would be bound in expensive parchment that required the skins of hundreds of animals. The final cost was, well, it was equivalent to a nobleman's small estate.
So we're not just talking about limited access. This is a system that's literally built on scarcity and expense.
Exactly.
If knowledge is that rare and that costly, it basically guarantees that only the highest echelon, the church, the royal courts, the powerful universities, will ever possess it.
Precisely. And words weren't just guarded by physical limitations, they were guarded by interpretation.
Mm.
So if a court wanted a specific legal precedent emphasized, or the church wanted a particular theological reading reinforced,
The gatekeeper was right there.
the gatekeeper was physically present. They licensed the copyist, they owned the original text, and they dictated what the acceptable meaning was. It was controlled by bottleneck. The whole structure was designed for stasis, really. It meant that authority didn't just control what you read, it controlled what you were even capable of understanding.
So if there was a dangerous idea out there,
The authority just made sure the text containing it never made it past the copying stage. It was that simple.
okay, so let's unpack that moment. The moment that bottleneck just breaks. As printing presses spread through cities, often quickly, sometimes even secretly, they start reaching places that the gatekeepers just can't monitor, and suddenly the balance of power starts to shift, almost overnight.
It does.
The disruption wasn't just about speed, it was a failure of control. And the sources highlight, too, deceptively simple consequences of this unbound word. First, ideas could now travel without permission.
Right. You didn't need a royal or a clerical license for every single copy that was printed,
And that leads right to the second point.
which is that text could be copied without approval.
Hmm.
And just think about the difference in scale there. Instead of one monk painstakingly copying one chapter a day, a small team could run off maybe 500 copies of a 20-page pamphlet in the time it took that monk to just clean his quill.
Wow.
And this speed, this affordability, it completely changed the relationship between the reader and the text in a way that just terrified the power structures.
Yeah.
Before, if you encountered scripture, it was in a formal setting.
Read aloud by a priest or a master.
Exactly, someone who guided your understanding. But now, readers could encounter these complex, challenging, even radical ideas in private, in their own homes or in taverns or on the street.
Without an authority standing right there next to them, guiding the interpretation.
That's the key. That specific detail made the established institution so deeply uneasy.
But hold on, if they had such absolute power, why didn't the church or the crown just ban the presses immediately? I mean, they had armies, they had censors. Why couldn't they just apply the old methods, burning a few manuscripts?
And that is the critical friction point. The old methods were designed to police scarcity. They failed catastrophically when they were faced with volume.
Ah, okay.
By the time the authorities even realized the danger, there were already thousands of presses running. They were printing in regional languages. They were disseminating material faster than any medieval messenger could possibly track.
So trying to hunt down and burn, say, 5,000 cheap pamphlets was just impossible.
Physically and logistically impossible. Think about Luther's famous tract to the Christian nobility. Every time they held a burning, it just advertised the material existed. It drove up demand for the copies that survived.
So the technology itself was too decentralized.
And too fast. Centralized power simply couldn't stop it operationally.
That structural failure brings us to what the source says about the nature of this attack. It's fascinating. It notes that the press didn't attack power directly. It didn't, start a civil war. It did something far more dangerous. And this is where it gets really interesting because the technology created such a subtle change. The sources suggest the act of printing removed the gate. It didn't storm the castle. It just eliminated the main security checkpoint entirely. And once that interpretive gate was gone, central control just couldn't be maintained anymore.
That idea of gate removal is, I think, the most potent insight we can get from the source material.
Yeah.
It leads us straight to 2 key lessons about how systems of authority actually function.
Okay.
So lesson 1, knowledge accessibility weakens control. And this isn't just about reading. It's about the technical inability to police every instance of information.
Because control relies on things being scarce and expensive and slow.
Exactly. Printing reversed all 3. When the tools for reproduction paper and ink became cheap enough for almost anyone, that monopoly on dissemination just vanished.
I think we sometimes forget how much standardization played a role in that gate removal. Before printing, every handwritten copy of a text, say a Roman legal text, might have subtle differences, right? Errors, things added in.
Absolutely. And that ties directly into the second lesson.
Yeah.
Authority depends fundamentally on managing interpretation.
Right.
The printing press introduced standardized, identical texts. So for the first time, scholars, or even just interested laypeople in different cities, could compare dozens of copies of the same scripture or the same scientific treatise.
And they could be sure they were looking at the exact same thing.
Yes. And suddenly, all the contradictions, the errors, or the deliberate misinterpretations that were pushed by the gatekeepers, they became visible. The real power isn't in locking up the books. The power is in defining what the books mean.
And when you let a reader hold a standardized text and form their own conclusion without a priest or a censor standing there,
you destroy that interpretive monopoly. It's gone.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this loss of control was actually profoundly subtle. It didn't trigger immediate rebellion. It triggered intellectual independence.
That's it. The loss of control wasn't measured in riots. Not at first. It was measured in the growing understanding that silence was no longer guaranteed.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if a university professor published a critique of astronomy, or a theologian challenged the Pope's authority, the institution could no longer just ensure that critique never saw the light of day. The argument was out there. It was multiplying. It was ensuring that the uncomfortable conversation had to happen.
In public?
In the public sphere, yes.
So if printing didn't create outright resistance overnight, it didn't arm the populace, what did it create that was so destabilizing? The sources are really clear on this. It created visibility. It made institutional practices, government decisions, theological arguments. It made them all public and scalable in a way they never were when they were just confined to, exclusive court circles.
And what's the inevitable consequence of that kind of visibility?
According to the analysis, it's that visibility always invites questions. You could easily ignore one handwritten treatise questioning the king's divinity. You just couldn't ignore thousands of printed vernacular translations of scripture circulating in every town square.
Forcing people to ask.
Forcing people to ask, wait, is that what the original text actually says?
This distinction between direct confrontation and this systemic visibility is just critical for understanding how technology changes power. Confrontation is often localized. It can be suppressed with force.
But visibility?
Visibility is structural. It's slow. And once it's achieved, it's almost impossible to contain.
Which brings us to the final 2 lessons from the sources.
Right, and they really cement this difference. So, lesson 3. Visibility changes power more than confrontation does. When the entire system is suddenly operating in the light, every inconsistency, every abuse, every contradiction is just. It's magnified by the sheer number of witnesses.
So in effect, printing forced the authorities into a defensive posture they just weren't used to. They couldn't rule by mystery and obscurity anymore.
No, they were forced to engage publicly with these challenges.
Which brings us to the final lesson, the core of what they were actually fighting against when they started, banning books, creating indices of forbidden materials, hunting down printers.
Exactly. And that is lesson 4. Systems resist not change itself, but the loss of control. They might tolerate minor adjustments to policy, sure, but they absolutely cannot tolerate losing the mechanism, the gate by which they dictate reality and manage public perception.
So the printing press wasn't just a challenge.
It was the removal of the control lever, entirely.
So when we put this all together, the central finding is just so clear. The true threat of printing was making that kind of absolute control impossible. It forced authority out of the shadows and into a public debate they were completely ill-equipped to win.
Hmm.
They had to confront uncomfortable knowledge directly. They had to issue counterarguments, address the questions of this growing, educated public, rather than just enforcing silence.
That is just a stunning reflection on the architecture of power. The story of printing is ultimately a powerful lesson in how a new communication technology can radically change the structure of authority.
By fundamentally shifting who owns the narrative.
Exactly. Moving that ownership from the elite few to the scalable many. And this, I think, leaves us with a truly provocative thought for you, the listener, as you navigate our own digital environment. If authority depends so fundamentally on managing interpretation, on defining the truth, what modern forms of gatekeeping still exist today?
That's a great question.
When information seems absolutely free and unbound on the internet, where is interpretation still controlled? Maybe by algorithms or by platform ownership? Even when accessibility feels universal.
That's the challenge for all of us to consider as we look at our own era of technological disruption. Thank you for sharing these sources. In the next episode, we're going to see the authorities' desperate, monumental attempt to respond to this threat by regulating, censoring, and trying to reclaim control over the printed word. Join us then for the continuation of that monumental struggle.